Hello and welcome to Conway Video. So I wanted to do a bit of a talk about incentives and developers and code quality. Um, I think there's an assumption in the software industry, or at least a lot of people who are talking about software. They assume that code quality is what everyone wants, that good quality code is always good, is always the most important thing. I suppose the idea that it's the most important thing has kind of been dying down a little bit because I think there is a bit of an awareness in the industry that companies that are growing fast in the past have had quite a lot of success with poor quality code, at least as we define quality generally these days. We think about things like unit testing, we think about clean code, we think about modular code, reusable code, clean interfaces, and so on. But that doesn't always matter, and the industry has caught up to the fact that that's not always important. But I think one thing the industry hasn't quite caught up with is that sometimes there's actually a pretty strong disincentive to have code that is quality, that is well written. And I can think of a number of reasons off the top of my head why that might be the case, why it might not be in the best interests of developers to have quality code or of other people in a business, or why it might actually be in their interests for the code not to be good quality. And also, I think I've seen some different workplaces and how they operate, and I've also seen, from those workplaces as well, and certain experiences I've had, I've seen why sometimes it isn't really in the best interests of the people who are working with the code or within the company necessarily to have good quality code. So you can probably imagine quite a lot of reasons for that, and I think one reason you can probably imagine is job security. Job security basically meaning, in this context, meaning if the code is really high quality and does its job perfectly well and can be maintained very easily, you can very easily bring someone on board who doesn't have very much experience and they can very quickly get up to speed. Well, then you've kind of made it yourself redundant in a way. You've made it unnecessary for the company to hire you as a developer or whatever professional you are. And so there is a sense in which it can seem like doing not necessarily a poor job, but having such a focus on quality and achieving really good quality code isn't actually necessarily going to be a profitable decision for all the people involved in the enterprise. Now, in some cases, that's not true. In some cases, it's good to have quality code, and I think, for example, you can definitely look at companies that are growing but are also kind of stable in the sense that they've achieved certain milestones in funding, and they're at a certain level of maturity, and at that point, they need to be able to scale, and so they need the code to be of good quality because they need a lot of people to come in and work with that code. But then there's also other scenarios where a company might maybe say they might have been around for quite a while, they're fairly stable, but they're looking to cut costs. And there are some people who have a lot of experience in that company, they've worked with that company or that industry for a long time, and they don't necessarily want to make themselves redundant. They know that if the company starts to think they're no longer needed, that they feel, or they have good reason to feel, that they're going to lose their job. And they don't want to lose their job because that's annoying, and that could bring up all kinds of problems for them. So it's very easy, I think, to understand why someone in that situation, their incentive isn't for the code to be like good and perfect. Their incentive is more for the code to be maybe a little bit buggy, a little bit difficult to work with, a little bit kind of, it requires certain kind of knowledge that there's only someone who's been in that industry or even with that specific code base for a long time would have. Another scenario is a company hires another company to do the development work. So it's an outsourcing arrangement. The company, its core competency isn't software development, or at least they don't think it is. And so they hire an external third party to do that. And so with the third party being in that sort of situation, it's obviously not necessarily in their interests for the code to be very easy to work with, because that may mean less work coming their way, whether that means less bugs and therefore less tickets going their way and therefore less money, less revenue. Or it could just mean also that the company can now find a cheaper outsourcing provider to give the work to, and that provider is going to then undercut the first provider and they'll lose business because of that. So you can again see that incentives play an important role. If someone doesn't have an incentive to deliver quality code because they may get actually paid less if they deliver good quality code, then that's a good reason for them not to deliver that quality code. At least not quality in the sense that it's very easy to work with, it's easy for someone new to come in and get upskilled in, and so on, etc., etc. Now, I do want to stress, I don't think this is always the case or even usually the case. I do think a lot of the time, quality code is actually in everyone's best interests. For one big reason, which is that you can do more with quality code. You can offer more products and services, you can grow more, you can scale higher, you can achieve better things. And in that kind of environment, in that kind of workplace, developers do want to contribute good code. Firstly, because they're going to be taking responsible for that code, so taking responsibility. But secondly, because they want the company to do well, because then they'll do well. The company's trajectory is upwards, and they're going to ride along upwards with that company. Maybe they've got stock options in the company, or maybe there will just be opportunities for promotion or future work or whatever. So I think there's a good number of companies and a good amount of scope for good quality code. So I don't want to say that that's going away or that's not important, or even that it's less important. But what I do want to kind of think about, what I've been thinking about, maybe you've been thinking about too, is the idea that it's not always a good thing, or in a developer's interest for the code to be easy to work with, and sometimes at least they have good reason to perceive that it's not in their interests. And so when you're in an environment where things seem to be a little bit strange, people seem to write code in a strange way, and things seem to work a bit strange, you can always think about this, I think. You can always think about the incentives. You can always think about, okay, why would they act in that sort of way? It's not necessarily because they're not a good developer. It's not necessarily because they didn't think about quality. It may be because they are going to be in a better position if the code is difficult to maintain and complicated to maintain, because they're going to get more business. There's a little bit of perhaps an injustice here, because you know, you probably would, if you were in charge of purchasing software development services, you'd probably want good quality. You wouldn't want bad quality. I mean, if you were taking your car in to be repaired, you wouldn't want the car to come out of the repair shop with even more defects than it came in with. And so you would think less highly of that repair, of that mechanic. But again, I think if you go into a place where they're making software and you don't understand why the quality is poor, well, I think this way of thinking can give you some insight and give you a lens through which to view that situation and make sense of that situation. And that's a good thing, because then you're a bit less confused. You don't feel like so much that you're going crazy or that other people are crazy. You just sort of think, okay, there's reason behind this. There's a bit of reason behind this madness. There's a reason people are trying to keep the code in this kind of fragile state, because there's some money involved, there's some business, there's some job security involved here. And those things are very important. They affect people's lives. It's not something to be taken lightly. It might seem like, oh, it's just code, why does it matter? But these codes, these text files, these numbers and letters and characters on the screen, they do actually mean real things. They mean salaries, they mean profits or losses. They do actually end up meaning quite a lot. They significantly impact people's lives. So I think it can be good to understand that and go into a new environment with the understanding that that's how things can work sometimes. I also do think, and I'm going to make another video on this subject, but I do think that working with difficult code, working with code that has almost deliberately been engineered for you not to be able to work easily with it, that can be a really useful skill, and it can be a useful kind of brain training thing, where you, by working in that environment, you develop a resilience that you probably wouldn't have had before, that maybe a lot of developers wouldn't actually have. If you're always working in clean, easy, perfect environments, you might not develop those mental muscles that you really start to need to use when you're working in a more challenging environment. So like someone who's a car mechanic in, I don't know, Siberia, where it's freezing cold all the time, they're going to be develop probably a very high level of resilience that someone who is a car mechanic in a more easier climate, like, I don't know, Florida in America, they might not have developed that level of resilience and that level of toughness. So I think if you are in that situation where the code isn't perfect and it's a bit hard to deal with, and maybe it's intentionally that way, one thing you can take away from that is, well, it's making me more resilient. It's making me tougher. It's making me mentally stronger. I'm going to go to the next gig and the next code, and I'm going to have like way more energy, way more strength to be able to attack that problem after having spent a long time in a more hostile, shall we say, code base. So anyway, those are my thoughts about incentives and why code quality isn't always the most important thing, and sometimes it's actually in people's interests for the code to not be quality at a given workplace at a given time. Not always, not even most of the time. Probably not even in a large number of cases, but it's definitely a factor. I think a significant in a significant number of work environments and places. So it's something good to take on board. Thanks for watching.